Heterosexual dating is basically an extreme sport now. Marriage rates are in free fall, birth rates are collapsing, Gen Z's not getting laid. God, they're not getting laid. The only thing reproducing successfully is resentment. And the bar is literally in hell to the point where people online are romanticizing the concept of like a woman who just texts back at all, or a man who doesn't see Andrew Tate as a philosopher. Everybody thinks they're the sane one, everybody thinks the other sex is delusional, and the comment sections online make it look like the human race is seconds away from doing selective breeding based on zodiac signs and credit scores. The rules between men and women changed way faster than anybody has learnt how to adapt to, and right now we're living in like a pretty chaotic transition, desperately trying to connect using instincts from history and whatever rules from social media are trending that day, and rapidly shifting societal expectations that we are essentially like duct taping together at this point. By the end of this video, I want to break down why things feel like so hostile right now and what the solution looks like that isn't just men suck or women suck, because there has to be something between die alone and submit to your husband or perish. So let's get into it. The old marriage social construct is gone. For most of human history, marriage wasn't about romance or emotional fulfillment. It was just like a practical arrangement. Men controlled economic and legal power, and women relied on that access to resources to survive. A husband provided income and protection and social legitimacy, and a wife provided free labor, raising children, doing the housework, running the household, managing family life generally. Whether one or both of those people actually liked that arrangement wasn't really the point. Compatibility was a huge luxury for women, and survival was the priority. Then very quickly, in historical terms, everything changed. Women entered the workforce in large numbers and gained access to bank accounts and credit, and could own property and pursue higher education, delay childbirth or forego it altogether if they wanted to, and leave bad relationships. Once women had economic and legal independence, marriage stopped being a requirement for survival and started becoming a choice. The problem is that cultural expectations surrounding marriage didn't evolve at the same pace as laws and the economy. Men were still raised to believe their primary role was to provide financially or protect the family in the 1 in a million chance that the home gets invaded.
What's wrong with women looking for a provider? That's just good economic sense. And what's wrong with that? A good man wants to provide for his woman. He wants to pay for dinner. He wants to pay for the house. He wants to pay for the cars. He wants to take care of it so that he can have a soft, loving woman at home. You can't be mad at women for having standards just because you can't live up to them.
His money is my money. My money is my money. That's not selfish. That's the standard when you're with a real man. A provider doesn't see providing as a burden. He sees it as his role.
And that was basically it. It was very clear cut and very simple to understand. But this continued even as it became harder for men to stand out economically, and women no longer needed a provider to live comfortably. Women were still conditioned to believe that their value was tied to being chosen and becoming a wife and a mother, even though they were now able to build entire lives on their own and find meaning in a much broader spectrum of ways, in ways that men have always been afforded. And that mismatch between like the old script that we were taught and the new reality that we're living in, I think, is at the core of almost all modern tension between men and women. So like the underlying economic deal of marriage collapsed, but nobody rewrote the emotional and social deal that was supposed to replace it. We're rewriting it now through very, very messy trial and error, otherwise known as the gender wars. And that fracture is where everything else grows from: the conflict and the confusion and the resentment and the unrealistic dating expectations and the belief that the opposite sex is suddenly impossible to deal with. Worth noting that this is mostly an issue with heterosexual relationships. This is very much a like binary partisan man versus women thing. So that's how I'll be talking about it in this video, because for every other form of relationship, this isn't as much. There's still roles in that you play. There's still gender roles to an extent, but it's not as much of a complete dumpster fire. But in general, the fact that women don't have to participate anymore in relationships for survival is really throwing a spanner in the works for men everywhere. For decades, the dominant cultural narrative was that men were the ones who didn't want commitment. In movies and sitcoms and everyday conversation, husbands were portrayed as miserable and trapped and constantly trying to escape their nagging wives and their family. Jokes about hating your wife were practically a pillar of Western media, and still are in many ways. Yet now that women are increasingly the ones opting out of marriage and choosing to stay single, many of those same voices have suddenly shifted their tune. The exact behavior that was normalized and even celebrated when men did it is now being framed as a moral failing when women do it. When men didn't want marriage, it was relatable. When women don't want marriage, it's a moral failing and it's a societal crisis. And there's one part of this whole men versus women conversation that gets left out constantly, and it might be the most important one. For all the arguing about like gender roles and dating and who's doing what wrong, almost nobody is talking about how disconnected people feel from themselves. Not just from each other, but from their own bodies and desires. So many of us have learned through conditioning or otherwise to approach intimacy like a performance or a test. Am I doing this right? Am I doing too much? Am I not enough? Am I broken? Am I disappointing someone? And when you're carrying all of that into dating and relationships, everything becomes harder. Communication and sex and confidence, vulnerability, all of it. And that's why I'm really, really proud to be partnering with Beducated on this video. Beducated is an online platform with hundreds of expert-led courses on sex and intimacy, confidence and self-discovery. And what I love the most about it is it isn't about like fixing yourself for a partner. It's about actually getting to know your body, getting to know your boundaries and your pleasure without shame or pressure. Whether you're single or dating or in a long-term relationship, it's honestly one of the most empowering ways to unlearn the scripts that we were handed and rebuild intimacy on your own terms. There are courses like relationship rebuilding, handling conflict and impulsive behavior, which navigates dealing with conflict, which could help a lot of the kinds of people I'm talking about in this video, or other topics covering like communication and dating and sexual compatibility and emotional well-being. Or there's the quickies section, which I love, which is basically like little bite-sized courses. If you want to try it out, and I highly, highly recommend that you do, you can use the link in my description so that they know I sent you. And use the code Brianne69 to get 65% off the annual pass. That's only $69 for the whole year. And there's a 14-day money-back guarantee, so it's totally risk-free. I love Beducated. I don't think there's anyone who can't benefit from using it. So thanks again to Beducated for sponsoring this video. So men are having like a bit of an identity crisis at the moment, and it makes sense when you think about the context.
Women are ungrateful, narcissistic parasites. I would argue that one drunk man is worth 3 women with me.
I think no matter what, a powerful man will simp to a woman. Therefore, a woman in every circumstance in life is superior to a man.
I'm speaking to the simps, to these males, not men. Little boys, males, you are not men.
This is why you should never cry in front of your girl. Guys, you have heard that you should be more vulnerable. You should open up more. You should share your emotions. Men, we're not meant to be emotional creatures.
One of the most toxic expectations women have of men is expecting a man to relate to his feelings. Not gonna happen. With the culture that we live in right now, men are not allowed to have feelings.
After everything that has happened culturally over the last few decades, a lot of men are lost. Even if some of the structures that oppressed women needed to fall apart, though the collapse of those structures didn't come with like a nice, neat, easy to understand, easy to implement blueprint to replace that in terms of masculinity and what it means to be a man. Women were told who they could be outside of like marriage and motherhood, and men weren't necessarily given an equivalent roadmap for who they could be outside of a provider. For generations, a man's worth was measured by what he earned and how well he provided, what his achievements were, whether he had a wife and family. That's kind of it. Those things used to be the foundation for male identity. Now women can provide for themselves. They don't need marriage for survival. Then they're more selective than ever about the emotional quality of a partnership. And a lot of men are desperately clinging to the old script, and it's not working, so they're getting angry and they have no idea what role they're supposed to play anymore. There's no clear and decisive cultural script for modern masculinity. And a lot of men are feeling like the role that they were raised for just doesn't exist anymore. For Gen Z specifically, there's like an added layer that often gets missed in a lot of these conversations. A lot of young Gen Z men were growing up and becoming socially aware during the height of like the Me Too movement and the mainstream resurgence of feminism. They didn't live through like the decades and centuries where women were openly mocked and excluded from workplaces, denied financial independence, weren't allowed to own credit cards, weren't allowed to own property, and were expected to tolerate abuse just to survive. And I'm not saying those things don't still happen, because all of them still do, but it wasn't as pronounced when this generation was growing up. They didn't really witness how recent so many rights women now have actually are, or how aggressively and violently society resisted them. Again, they still are. I'm not saying that it's not still happening. I'm not saying gender equality was achieved and they just didn't see any of the fallout. We still don't have rights to our own bodies in a lot of places on this earth. Women's rights as a human being still change state to state or country to country. There's no male equivalent for that. I don't think there's a country on earth where a man's rights to his own body change at all. But what many of these young men did see in their very first exposure to like gender discourse was a huge cultural pushback on men. They kind of like became conscious and entered the world at the moment society was challenging male control and male entitlement without seeing the full extent of centuries of abuse and harassment and marginalization and oppression and femicide and everything that led up to that pushback and made that pushback so necessary. And again, it's still necessary. More pushback is needed. But from their perspective, it wasn't like a correction after a long history of inequality. It looked like the world hates men for no reason and I'm being punished for something that I didn't do. Combine that with the collapse of the old script of what being a man is and you get the perfect storm. Young men felt criticized without understanding the context and judged by a set of expectations they were never taught how to meet. And when you strip away that identity without offering a replacement, a vacuum forms. That vacuum is exactly where the manosphere grifters stepped in.
Yeah, well, I don't know. You should be in the kitchen somewhere, but it's fine. We'll have this discussion. Because a man's job is to be a leader and be assertive and convey information. Women, you guys are supposed to be quiet and make sandwiches. Oh, well, you guys are useless to society, so. Instead
of telling young boys and telling men you're struggling because the world changed and your fathers and men in society taught you the old script and that doesn't work anymore. These manosphere podcast bro red pill grifters offered a far easier and more emotionally satisfying explanation, which is you're struggling because women ruined everything and it's all women's fault and you can just place the blame over there instead. Don't look inwards, women did this to you. That was essentially the message. They took a very real problem, which is men feeling lost and lonely and purposeless, and pinned the cause on women gaining rights and autonomy and preferences. It's an incredibly effective pitch. If you tell someone that their pain is structural, then they have to do inner work and they have to develop themselves. But if you tell someone that their pain is someone else's fault, they get instant relief and also a scapegoat. So instead of helping men build community and emotional literacy and purpose or resilience, these grifters intentionally stoke resentment and earn money by feeding that resentment. They turned male insecurity into a revenue stream and anger into the product that they're selling. The worse men feel, the more content they consume from these like red pill manosphere content creators, and the more these people profit off it. But the biggest lie they sell isn't that women are the enemy. The biggest lie that they always sell is that men don't have to grow in any way that meaningfully will get them out of this situation. They tell them that the whole world is wrong and women especially are wrong, not their skill set. That the solution is entitlement, not development. And any development that they do tend to suggest is just feeding the same old script that doesn't work, whilst also feeding insecurities, saying that you just have to earn more, you just have to somehow be taller, you have to go to the gym, you have to be stoic and emotionless. Like all of these things that are the things that are not working. And they're the things women don't want. It's insane how much this has taken hold because it makes no logical sense. So what starts as you're hurting and it's not your fault quickly becomes you deserve control and superiority and obedience from women. Pain turns into misogyny and then vulnerability kind of develops into hostility. And it's not because these men are inherently just born hateful. It's because someone discovered that there was money to be made by keeping them that way. And the lack of direction shows up everywhere. Rates of loneliness are higher among men than women. Friendship circles are shrinking for young men. More and more men report not having someone to turn to during like emotional hardship because men don't typically seek out and nurture those kinds of relationships because they're told that if they do that, they're feminine and they're weak. For a lot of men, the only person that they've ever allowed themselves to be emotionally vulnerable with and to show emotion with is like a girlfriend or a wife. So when women no longer want or need relationship, to men, that reads as a direct threat on their access to happiness and emotional fulfillment. And that's how red pill creators become like surrogate father figures. They stepped into that leadership vacuum. They offer certainty where life feels confusing, and simple rules that are easy to understand where gender dynamics feel messy, and a sense of belonging and purpose to men that feel isolated. You don't have to agree with their conclusions to understand why so many men have turned to them. The conclusions are misguided and incorrect and harmful at best, but they don't tell turn to these people necessarily because they hate all women, although so many of them do, but it is because of that vacuum and no one else is showing up to help them figure out who they are now, where their place is, what their place is, X, Y, and Z, and where they fit into this new script. There are very few extremely popular positive masculinity creators or like public figures because, again, the solutions that men who exhibit positive masculinity are offering are inherently harder than just blaming women for everything, because it requires men to grow and adapt and let go of this old script that it doesn't exist anymore. The power and control and entitlement that their fathers and grandfathers had over women does not exist anymore. They're clawing at a system that has already died. Obviously, none of this excuses misogyny. It doesn't justify harmful behavior, but it does explain why so many men are struggling with this. And unless we acknowledge that issue, the conversation will always be a tug of war where each gender demands empathy without offering any first. Robert Irwin, I feel, is like the pinnacle of positive masculinity. That's a man. Like, that is a man. He's passionate, he's driven, he speaks up for women's issues, he speaks up about endometriosis because it affected his sister. He's empathetic, he's never had an issue crying in public or showing big emotions in public, and he still wrestles crocodiles. He's still like the masculine archetype. We need at least 4 billion more of him in society. And on that note, I'd like to say a big thank you to all of my upper tier patrons who keep this channel going. If you want to become a patron and support the channel, there's tiers for as low as $3 a month. Literally every dollar helps so much. There's bonus content over there. I've been doing like mini commentary videos over there similar to these, just not half an hour long on topics that you don't need like a half an hour video to cover, but it's still really interesting. Depending on what tier you choose, you can also get up to 20% off my clothing brand Rift Supply Co. So if you want a tee or a hoodie or a hat or any of the things you're currently looking at, head to riftsupplyco.com. And if you want up to 20% off, head to patreon.com/brianneworth. But I do want to be clear, the gender wars aren't like two evenly matched teams competing in a tug of war. The playing field between men and women is far from equal. Misogyny doesn't just show up in comment sections or bad jokes. It is literally embedded into everyday life. It is in every way that people, men and women, speak about women generally. There is this constant like thread of disdain whenever women are spoken about, pretty much at all, in any industry, in any domain. It's in the way that women have to filter their behavior so they don't get the wrong attention or say the wrong thing and make a man angry, which can and does too often result in women literally being killed. It's the way we choose different routes home, what clothes to wear, how late to stay out. It's in the constant like fear management system that we have to have that most men don't ever think about, and the constant unrelenting societal criticism against women. Women are told that we are doing everything wrong no matter what we do, no matter what we choose. If you sleep around, you're a slut. If you don't, you're a prude. And if you focus on your career, you're a bad wife and you're a bad mother. But if you don't, then you're a gold digger and a freeloader. If you stay in an abusive relationship with a man, it's your fault for tolerating. If you leave, it's your fault for breaking up the family and increasing divorce rates. If you're a single mother, you're blamed for struggling with doing the job of two people, or doing the job of a whole village, even though they're the only parent that stayed, and the father that abandoned the family is rarely criticized at all. If you're confident, you're arrogant. If you're insecure, you're attention seeking. If you wear modest clothes, you're boring. If you dress in revealing clothes, you're asking for it. If you talk about your emotions, you're a dramatic, emotional woman. If you don't, you're cold and you're not feminine enough. If you're thin, you're trying too hard and you're also not curvy enough. But if you gain weight, you've let yourself go. If you set boundaries, you're difficult. If you don't, then you're a doormat. None of these judgments, and their constant judgments, are about women making good choices. They're about ensuring women can never make the right choice. The target keeps moving because the goal isn't perfection, it's just control. The hard numbers are also stark. Men commit over 90% of all violent crime. It doesn't matter what kind of crime you're talking about. Homicides, gun violence, domestic violence, serial killers, rape and assault, all of it. Literally all of it. Femicide and men's violence against women is still a global crisis. And these aren't like maybe hypothetical statistics. This is real life. This is the shit women have to deal with from men. It's also important not to lose sight of where power currently sits. Men still hold the overwhelming majority of leadership positions worldwide, in politics, in corporate upper management, in tech, in media, in law, in finance. Men control most of the world's wealth and own most of the world's assets. In many countries, including including the US, like including Western countries, men are still the ones writing and voting on laws about women's bodies and women's healthcare and reproductive rights and safety. Could you imagine if there was like a group of 12 women deciding what men could do with their bodies? Scratch that. Could you imagine if almost all politicians were women? The uproar that would come as a result of that. Then they would be able to see the complete inequality of it all. Even in Western nations where women have far more legal freedom than in the past, the decision-making structures that shape society at the highest levels are still predominantly male. So when conversations online about like the gender wars frame it as a simple like men versus women conflict, it ignores the fact that one group still largely holds all of the power to shape the landscape and the other group is forced to navigate that. And one group has for centuries done everything in their power to oppress and silence and marginalize and dehumanize and abuse and murder the other side. That is a 100% one-way street. Women systemically do not do these things to men. And even when women are now choosing just to opt out of relationships with men, they're doing just that. Opting out. Not seeking revenge, not attacking men physically, not murdering men, not plotting against them, just simply not participating, not engaging. Men, on the other hand, frequently turn to violence or murder or harassment or assault or oppressing women and plotting to strip them of their rights. It's simply not the same thing. If you accept that women have been fighting uphill for centuries to vote, to work, to own property, to be safe in their own bodies, then you must logically accept that the current gender war narrative isn't just two sides arguing over who has it worse. It's a course correction and the pushback required after centuries of inequality that are still deeply ingrained today, just to eventually try and arrive at something that might one day resemble an even playing field. So when this guy says women have to settle, he's not talking about just giving dating advice.
Listen, some of y'all ladies gonna have to settle. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but listen, everybody can't have a perfect man out here. It ain't even enough of us around, like, let's be honest. So at the end of the day, we can go ahead and put that 50-50 conversation to rest, because every woman ain't gonna get 80, 20, 100, 0, whatever y'all thinking is gonna be 60, 40. Some of y'all gonna have to go 50-50, and shit, y'all might gotta go 60-40 on your end with the man, just to be happy at the end of the day. Like, you can't have the best of the best. Sometimes you gotta just go for what you got and be happy and be grateful, because you can have nothing at the end of the day and be miserable.
He's revealing the assumptions that he believes are universal, that men are so vital to women's happiness that opting out of that partnership simply isn't a real choice. You have to settle, or God forbid, you'll be alone. The subtext and the undertones of this is that you can't actually be fulfilled without us, so you have to lower your standards enough to make space for us in your life. The root of it becomes clear when you listen to the tone of the settle argument. It assumes that women are supposed to reorganize their lives around men's well-being, not their own. It assumes that all women want a man in their life more than they want to uphold their own standards. Choosing to stay single, even if a woman is genuinely happy, is presented as the wrong choice because it doesn't center a man. The whole message of videos like this, and there are plenty of them, depends on the belief that women need men and therefore women should compromise for the sake of continuing the system. What they're not understanding is women are leaving the system. And if we're being brutally honest, the reason guys like this talk like that is because a lot of men genuinely can't imagine a life where they're happy without a partner. And the data reflects that, not in an insulting way, but in a real way. Married men consistently report higher life satisfaction than married women, and unmarried men report the lowest life satisfaction of all demographics. Married men have a higher life expectancy and better overall health as a result, and married women have a lower life expectancy than single women. Men benefit from partnership in measurable emotional, physical, and longevity terms. Women can obviously benefit too, but on average the boost isn't as dramatically measurable as men, and in some areas married women are actually far worse off than single women. But the biggest thing that this man does not understand is that more and more women are actively choosing to avoid romantic partnership with men altogether. Guys like this don't seem to understand that most of the time they're not competing against other men. They're competing with how peaceful and happy and fulfilled women are in their own lives when they're single. They're competing against the life that she's built for herself. So if they're going to come into that happy and full life and not make it tangibly better in measurable ways, why on earth would any woman put her hand up for that? So when he says if you don't settle, you'll end up alone, it's not really about women. It's about the fear that men will be left without the emotional and social and domestic support that marriage historically provided. Because again, women no longer need marriage to survive, and men have never been taught how to build that support system outside of romantic partnership, which, mind you, robs men. This is particularly why we see like higher suicide rates in men, and why men are so much lonelier than women. Women are socialized to not only form but maintain these like rich social support networks with friends and family around them, and men are told that they don't have to worry about that emotional shit. And it is a net negative for men as a whole. Community and friends and social interaction is a human need, not a gendered need. So if you're going to rob an entire sex of that, obviously shit's gonna hit the fan at some point. So the settling message isn't just condescending, it's reactive. It's a panic response to the fact that women now have a choice, and a lot of men are afraid of what happens when women stop choosing them. One of the most significant but least understood social shifts of the last decade is that women are increasingly choosing to opt out. Not just to opt out of marriage, although that is happening, but relationships entirely. And it's not centered around like a hatred of men or a rejection of intimacy, because obviously, again, it's a human need, but it's just a straight up cost-benefit calculation. If partnership requires more labor and sacrifice and emotional management than it gives back, many women are deciding it just simply isn't worth it. The most dramatic example of this is like the 4B movement in South Korea, where large numbers of women are refusing to date, refusing to marry or have sex with or have children with men. It began as a response to pervasive misogyny and gendered expectations, which are pretty rampant in South Korea, and it's now grown into a formal identity and kind of a movement. These women aren't even protesting marriage, they are sidestepping it entirely. They're not trying to change men, they're just simply not participating. It is the ultimate form of disengagement. They're voting with their absence. But you don't have to look to South Korea to see the broader trend. Marriage rates are declining across much of the world. As we know, birth rates are falling below replacement levels in a ton of countries, in Australia, my country, in the US, in most Western countries at this point. And despite constant headlines about women being too picky or waiting too long, or our biological clocks are ticking, which, by the way, new studies came out, turns out that's not a thing. Turns out sperm quality degrades, drops off a cliff at like 30 to 35, 40, which is exactly what we thought happened with women. Interesting. That whole script about women expiring after 30, turns out that's what happens with men. It's literally old expired sperm that is the problem with fertility a lot of the time. And we're just finding this out. But many women are not acting out of like desperation or confusion. They're just acting out of clarity. The brainwashing is simply not working anymore. Women know they can support themselves. Women know they can build fulfilling lives without a husband. We're listening to married women who say don't get married. We're listening to our grandmothers that said don't do it. All in all, women are more and more approaching partnership as an optional life choice rather than a necessary one, which should be good news for men, because if you are being picked, it means you are being picked because they genuinely like you as a person. But somehow they're not happy with that. What officials call a population crisis is for many women simply the natural outcome of finally having autonomy. And a fairly universal complaint right now is that men are just not stepping up and bringing more to the table than just having a job. That's just not enough anymore. Women have jobs. This is arguably the first time in human history where a man's ability to succeed in a relationship depends not on his income or his social status, but on his character. Partnership today isn't secured through financial dependence. It's secured through being likable and emotionally intelligent and respectful and willing to contribute equally at home. Things like communication and empathy and accountability and emotional support, domestic labor, childcare, conflict resolution, and self-awareness matter a lot more than they ever have. And a lot of men weren't raised or socialized to develop those skills, not because they're inherently incapable of them, but because for thousands of years they didn't need them to secure a partner. Providing financially was enough compared to the whole span of human history, but the social training hasn't kept pace. So the result is a lot of men feel blindsided by a test they were never prepared for, and a lot of women feel exhausted by constantly picking up the emotional and domestic and interpersonal slack. Men and women feel this shift differently, of course. For men, the decline of marriage can feel like abandonment or rejection, which makes them angry. For women, the decision to stay single can feel like safety and freedom. The same behavior reflects two different different emotional realities. And until we understand and recognize and address why women are opting out, not just that they are, the conversation will always be reduced to blame instead of insight and solutions. So everything we've talked about so far is complicated enough in real life, but the internet makes it 10 times worse. Algorithms obviously don't reward nuance or empathy or ordinary people getting along. That's not profitable. It creates the illusion that these extreme personalities are everywhere, when in reality they are a very tiny fraction of the population. They're just loud and very polarizing and profitable to promote. In real life, most men and women aren't like screaming at each other about gender roles over brunch, but online the loudest voices frame the whole narrative, and we start assuming the worst about each other before we even walk into a conversation. The division isn't necessarily organic, like the division is there, the issues are there, but it's all manufactured because it performs well and makes money. That's why I always encourage people who are stuck in this kind of echo chamber to simply walk outside and look around. Just have a look. Manosphere creators and podcast bros will insist that women will only date men who are over 6 foot and earn good money and have a six-pack and all of the above. Simply walking outside on any given day of the week completely disproves this. There is an unlimited stream of extremely average men with beautiful girlfriends wherever you go. And I'm not saying that as an insult, I'm saying that because it's true. The reality is they are probably simply kind people, or they're funny, or they're fun to be around, and they're generally pleasant, which is the point. You don't need this grocery list of things to have a healthy relationship. Most of the time you just need to be like a halfway decent person and treat women as human beings, and a lot of guys still can't even meet that standard. Engage with real people, because 90% of the gender war content on the internet purely exists to drive rage and engagement and ultimately profit. So I think that a lot of the frustration between men and women today comes down to like confusion about standards. Women aren't suddenly entitled because they expect emotional reciprocity and respect and safety and effort. Those aren't luxury upgrades. That is like the bare minimum baseline of a healthy relationship. Women, again, don't need men for financial security anymore, so the bar has shifted from can he provide to can he be a good partner? And that includes things like communication and accountability and emotional intelligence and doing their fair share of domestic and mental labor. On the other side, a lot of men aren't wrong to feel directionless. It makes sense. For generations, masculinity was tied to providing financially and being stoic and leading the household. And as we've established, that script is gone, but for many young men, there hasn't been a clear replacement. And that, I think, is the core of the issue. The messaging is so mixed up. It's be a traditional man, but also don't be a traditional man, but also don't be weak, but don't be controlling. But you can't be passive either, but also don't be too dominant, and don't be too emotional, but also don't be closed off. It is a bit of a minefield, so it makes sense that some men don't know where they're supposed to land and haven't figured it out on their own. But here are like the core truths in all of this. Women don't need men to survive anymore, so connection has to be built on character and not obligation. And men don't need to be wealthy and flawless and a certain height and larger than life. They just need to be good teammates in life and not emotionless dictators. A healthy relationship today isn't about hierarchy. You are not running a ship. Like, this is not you're not a Marine. This is not the Navy. It's about teamwork. It's not men lead and women follow, and it's not women lead and men obey. It's about working together and deciding together and communicating well. That's really what a lot of this can be boiled down to. Gender roles can be chosen. They're not always inherited. You don't have to do that. You can just make your own script as well on top of all of this. You can write your own script and you can find someone that also enjoys the same script. It doesn't have to be much harder than that. You can choose whatever role you want to play in your relationships right now. You can start tomorrow if you want to. Societal expectations are not tangibly real. They tangibly do not have to exist. You get to choose what works for you. You can do the whole traditional relationship thing where the man pays for 100% of everything and the woman stays at home and cooks, if that works for both people. Or you can throw the script out entirely. The point is that it's intentional. It doesn't have to be automatic. And the point is to find someone that shares those values. Getting angry at women because they have autonomy now, when there are so many women who still want a traditional relationship, you can just go go and find them. You don't have to convince the women who don't want that to want that. I've never understood that part of it. Go find a woman or a man who shares the same values as you. What are we doing? But increasingly a modern relationship is just shared labor, shared responsibility, shared problem solving, shared goals, and shared mutual care and love. It can be that simple. It's two people bringing what they're good at, bringing their strengths to the table, working as equals, not two people playing characters they didn't even get to choose. At the end of the day, most people don't actually want like dominance or control or submission. They just want a teammate, someone safe and reliable to go through life with. Not perfection, not some grocery list fantasy, just someone who shows up and tries and grows with you and cares. The truth is the old system is gone. We are increasingly not living in a world where women are forced into certain roles and situations that they don't want to be in. And we're not living in a world where gender roles have to be fixed or where people stay together because they didn't have another choice. We are living in the messy middle, and it's a transition period between what relationships used to be and what they're becoming. And that's why it feels chaotic. Because it is. That's why everyone seems to think that the other side is unreasonable. We're trying to build a new model while still dragging the expectations of the old one behind us, and it's weighing everyone down. This was never really men versus women. It's old expectations versus modern reality. Men aren't the enemy, women aren't the enemy. The enemy is a script that no longer makes sense for the world that we live in, and the pressure to keep acting it out anyway. A lot of people are trying to figure out who they are and where they fit in, where connection is optional and where survival isn't the glue holding everything together anymore, and when relationships have to run on character instead of necessity. And a lot of people don't like that, but tough shit. If there's a hopeful takeaway, it is this. Relationships today have the potential to be the healthiest they've ever been, not because people need each other, but because people are choosing each other. The chaos that we're all feeling isn't proof that everything is broken beyond repair and can never be fixed. It's proof that we're in the middle of redefining what love and teamwork and partnership can look like. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know in the comments what your take is on this. I know this is gonna ruffle some feathers, but either way, regardless of where you sit on this, let me know what your opinion is below. If you've made it this far, leave a like, leave a comment. It really helps out. Become a patron. You can sign up for $1 if you feel like it. Just to fucking swing me $1. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Make your bed, eat your veggies. To the person that keeps commenting that they are not making their bed and eating their veggies, make your goddamn bed, eat the veggies.